Good morning, everyone. It's Dee. I wanted to provide you with some guidance on the dual language middle school curriculum map and the curriculum work happening June 13th through the 16th, and then again in August. Unfortunately, in June, I will not be able to be with you. However, we have a staff person who is coming in to do their practicum who will join you and support you, as well as the expertise that you all bring to this endeavor. So I know it'll be a great opportunity. So what I wanted to do is actually bring you through the curriculum map document and where all of our work will be stored. You can access the curriculum map three different ways. First of all, in Google Docs, it's called Dual Language 6-7 Curriculum Map. There is a link as well if you want to use the link. And in VB9, it's in the Comprehensive Literacy folder with the middle school resources. So the Dual Language 6-7 Curriculum Map will be there. The reason why it's in the Comprehensive Literacy folder is because it does contain the BOOFs for literacy. I'm considering putting it also into any of the middle school social studies and middle school science, so you can find it in multiple locations. So when you open that document, this is what you are going to see. At the very top, there is a table called Resources to Support Planning, and it's divided between social studies and science. In each of the areas, you're going to find a social studies unit BOOF template and a science unit BOOF template. Those templates are view only, so what I'm going to do is make a copy of those templates and I'm going to put them into the curriculum map below, calling them social studies Year B, Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Science Unit Year B, Units 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we will store those in our Google folder as well as in this curriculum map. You're also going to see rubrics. Those are the department rubrics that are associated with the content area, and they are updated. The science rubrics are translated into Spanish as science is taught in Spanish, just so that you're aware of that. Below, you're going to see, for social studies, the standards and essential questions for year A and B resource. And then for science, you'll see the core competencies, as well as the NGSS links. Those links are the one-page documents that show what teacher needs to do and what students need to accomplish scientifically. And then below that, on both sides, there are Dictado resources that demonstrate how to use the Dictado as a resource for a language. And then over on the science side, you'll notice that the old colorful spreadsheet, you know the one that's difficult to maneuver, that's linked in there as well because I suspect that you are going to need to access that resource to pull off some of the links that you've put in already. So I just want to let you know. So then the curriculum map is organized by A year, which are the odd numbered years. And then if you were to page down, it would be B year. You can see going from the left to the right, we've got the units and the approximate weeks that they're taught. The unit essential question, which is linked to the literacy BOOF, and hopefully the overarching essential question for social studies and science as well. Then you can see the literacy BOOF with the links. Liz has hyperlinked all of the links to the curriculum maps. Those curriculum maps are not changing. So the purpose of the ELA, SLA teachers getting together to talk about the curriculum maps is to make sure that they have good understanding of the academic language and the practices, etc. But the curriculum maps themselves are not changing. Then in social studies, you can see social studies is taught in English, so that's why the lettering is in blue. Each social studies unit is going to last 6 weeks, whereas the literacy units last 4 weeks. I'm sorry, the social studies units and the science units might last 6 to 7 weeks, depending upon the content. All of the social studies units will be in the middle. I will hyperlink the BOOF template into it, and that hyperlink will then be connected to the Google folder as well. Going over to the right, you'll see the science BOOFs. We will connect those in August. And then a little bit further on to the right, you're going to see a pre-unit prompt used to assess writing, and then an interdisciplinary common writing assessment. The writing pieces we are going to talk about on August 22nd when we come together. So if you want to pause the presentation and actually go into the document and take a look around, you can, but this presentation is going to bring you through all pieces of the document. Okay, we just talked about these. The social studies unit booth templates and the science booth templates look exactly like the ELA, SLA booth templates, so we have a really common format for articulating our curriculum maps. To be really, really clear, we are making one curriculum this summer. That one curriculum is going to be the guaranteed viable curriculum for dual language 6-7. If your site and your principal would like you to do something different, you can do that at a different time. But for the purpose of the planning time that we are coming together for this summer, we are creating one unit with specific content area that is consistent with the content that we have brought forth in the last 3 years. Okay, so here's just a quick snapshot of the B year, which are the even numbers, like 2016. So you can see the weeks on the left. The unit essential questions are to follow. The literacy booths are all hyperlinked. And then the social studies booths. All of the social studies units are going to have names and or themes. There are several themes in social studies that are going to be consistent across social studies for all middle school, and we will be using those exact same themes. They're really consistent with what we've already been doing. In fact, it's kind of shockingly consistent, so it's really validating for the work that you all have done for so many years on this curriculum. Okay, so let's take a deeper look. When we look at our essential questions, we have what makes an adventure. The literacy booth is the adventure unit and a focus on change. And then the social studies unit is also going to be on change and culture. You can see that this unit transcends both the adventure unit and the Asia and culture unit, which asks the question of how does where you live shape how you live. Matt Piat taught both A year and B year social studies this year, and I think through the course of his licensure had to create long form lessons for the social studies units. Those are, you're going to see how to find those in this document. Those might be great resources for aligning the kinds of essential questions, enduring understandings, but most of all the content that you all will be using. It is really important that the content in the booth be one content. Like I said, if your site chooses to have you teach different content at a different time, that's their prerogative, but for the purpose of creating a guaranteed viable curriculum that we can communicate across the district and to our stakeholders, both inside and outside the district, we're just making one content unit today. Well, actually, we're making 5. You're also going to see that there are benchmark prompts. As I said, we will talk about those August 22nd. As one of the big rocks that we will have for middle school is actually biliteracy assessment this year. Here we are, change in culture. There are essential questions that have been predetermined by the Department of Social Studies, which all of us will be using, including Flight Quest and Compass, as well as Habitat and any other situation. Those essential questions will be linked into and related to the overall unit essential questions. The most important thing to know about the essential questions for the social studies department is that they might not be the driving question, but you want to ensure that students can answer those questions at the end of your unit. And then more closely is an example of an English writing prompt that students will be writing to so that we can use it as part of our biliteracy assessment. So, I'm sure you're wondering what the social studies themes are for 6 and 7. They are recurring from 6th grade through 8th grade, but since our program only goes until 7th grade at Les Paul and Horning, we will be using these unit themes. And each unit has 3 questions. They've got like the 6th grade question, the 7th grade question, and the 8th grade question, which is intending to grow students' competency over time. Since we are going to be using these essential questions in multiple ways, and we don't really have a 6th and a 7th grade, but we have a first year and second year experience, it's very likely that you're going to have both the 6th and the 7th grade essential question as part of each unit, and then each student will address either the first and or the second question as they are developing. So, when you open the curriculum unit template, this is what it looks like. It will have the title of the unit, well, basically saying if it's social studies or science, and it will have year A or year B, and it will also have later on unit 1 through 5. Also are the dual language social studies essential questions. These essential questions, as I mentioned before, are the same across all the social studies departments. The flexibility that you have with the essential questions is to use the overall unit essential question that's linked to the BOOF, and then you need to make assurances that students can answer the essential questions of the department. They may or may not be look-fors next year, and I just want them to all be in the same spot. The enduring understandings you might choose to not attend to during this curriculum planning. Just know that it's there. We also did not put in standards into this curriculum document. You can choose to add in the standards if you like, but the standards at this point are a little bit nebulous in the fact that the Wisconsin Model Academic Standards are still the driving standards of our state, yet we are more and more getting closer to adopting the 5 C's, so that's why they're not there. There is a place for driving content. The Social Studies Department would like you all to declare what the driving content is. For example, Civil War, medieval ages, current events, like whatever it is, that driving content is one driving content, as this is one curriculum map that will be the guaranteed and viable curriculum. As I mentioned before, if you are interested in innovating something else, you'll have to do that at a different time under the supervision of your building principal. Then below are the key competencies and targets. Essentially, these are our learning targets. These are the competencies that we are asking students to attend to. You can see that none of the key competencies are related to any particular period in time or any particular skill like research or geography or anything like that. So just know that we have flexibility and that we want students to be able to do these things in social sciences, but they don't have to be married to any particular content area or topic, or is what I mean. Having said that, we don't have the flexibility or the time to go and innovate a new curriculum. The purpose of this is to do what we've always been doing and get it into the curriculum map. The last piece that you're going to see is the writing mode here. Because we want our students to be writing purposefully in this content area for disciplinary literacy, you all will have to decide the writing mode, meaning the writing genre that you will be specifically attending to as far as the craft and art of writing per unit. I would highly suggest that it either be a continuation of last month's literacy BOOF, just in the content area, or be somewhat related to the current literacy BOOF without avoiding replication. You don't want to be teaching the same lessons 2 different times in the day, but simply helping students learn how to write and read in the social sciences. So you will click into a document called the Essential Questions. As you can see, they're divided by year A and year B. I'm going to ask you as a team to think about which questions go into which units. The questions are separated and classified by the unit themes that you saw. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the essential questions that are directed by our school district into these columns and then transferred into our curriculum map. Okay, we talked about the key competencies and the targets. Let's talk a little bit about summative assessments. I think that most of you are in a position in which you are either ready to predetermine the criteria that you want to use to assess students, and then teachers devising a couple of ways that students can show their work, or some of you are in a position where you are asking students to determine the criteria for which they are going to ask that their work be assessed, and that the students themselves or individuals are determining actually what the content is that they are going to use to demonstrate the proficiency in the criteria. I wanted that to be as flexible as possible, as I think about 3 of you who are already teaching social studies are kind of in the place where you go between each of these things, and certainly this is a practice that we want to grow. So The rubrics here are the same rubrics that are directed by our school district that we must be using. You're going to see when you go into the rubrics that they are divided by 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so they're very linear. However, the Flight Academy, Quest, Dual Language, and Compass over at Les Paul are dealing with the same issues that we are dealing with, in the sense that they have students that are at multi-age and kind of on a continuum. So you will have to determine the criteria that you are going to use to assess this unit learning. But also know that you can leave it open for students to make different choices. So minimally, choose the criteria. Leave the option that if students want to choose the criteria, they can do that too. And then below, you have a place where your text and teaching resources and websites go. So what you might need to do is a lot of cutting and pasting from that old colorful curriculum map document that was in Excel, and just stick it in here. Here's an example of the rubrics for social studies. Sometimes you're going to see all grades, meaning 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, have the same criteria in their rubric. And then you are going to see rubrics in here that assess a skill or a target that is defined by 6th, 7th, and 8th grade competencies. So in the teaching resources, texts, and websites, here is just a snapshot of that old curriculum map, the Excel one that's really hard to maneuver. You may be adding materials and resources from that. But then I also took a photograph of the Google folder, which contains the 6th and the 7th grade units that Matt has had to skillfully create. So I just wanted to share that. If you have your own that you've been using, please share and bring them and consolidate that information. We want to be able to consolidate everything into this one curriculum map, which is going to be like the Bible, the one that we're going to use and follow. Okay, the next piece on the curriculum map is the determination and pre-planning of the vocabulary words that you will be using throughout your unit. As you can see, it's blue in English and black in Spanish. In addition to the vocabulary words that you know you're going to be using and you know you want students to be able to use, I also want you to think about the kind of language. Like, what do students need to do with language? Are they comparing and contrasting? Are they predicting? Are they sequencing? What are they doing with language? And start to think about some of the sentence frames and or academic language that students are going to need to acquire, and you can add that in there as well. For example, a real easy one would be if blank then, or something happened, semicolon, however, comma. Those kinds of things, so that we are kind of consistent with how we're addressing language. I realize that this is going to need greater support over time, and since I'm not available to help you with that, it may or may not end up in the curriculum map, which is fine. If you are determined to define the English words, then right away you want to make sure that you have the accurate and universal translation of that language in the Spanish section, because we want to make sure that we are all using the same academic language, as we have a lot of transients between our programs, and we don't want to leave it up to chance. So let's do both of those together. Then you will be planning your dictado for weeks 1 through 4. Unlike the literacy booths, the dictado in science and social studies is going to be comprised of one complex compound sentence per week. And that compound and complex sentence should encompass grammar points that students need, as well as the complex language and vocabulary in the academic area that you need them to be able to use proficiently and with fluency. If you have any questions about this, remember I showed you there's a link to a support document in the top of the resource section of the curriculum map that you can check into, but you can also use each other as resources, as many of you are using Dictado really consistently. Okay, so when you have the English and the Spanish words already here, just know that you will be using this pre-planning when you go down to plan for your week 5, which is the bridge week. There again are the Dictado resources. Okay, so now we get into the planning of the I can statements. The only thing that I want you to have in common with this regard, I don't want you going through like every single day, Monday through Friday lesson plans. I really want to know universally, what are the actual objectives? Like, say, by the end of week 1, students will be able to do these things. By the end of week 2, students can do these things, week 3, week 4. That's the most important thing. The actual daily planning is up to each one of you individually or collectively at your sites to flesh out. The most important thing to know is that in the first week, unlike monolingual classrooms, in the first week is when all of the experiential learning is happening. That's when we're watching videos, we're looking at primary resources, we're interviewing people, we're really getting an opportunity to address what's called concept attainment. We want to make sure that our students have one common background knowledge that we refer to rather than relying upon students' prior knowledge, which might be all over the place. So that week 1 is really about concept attainment. If you want to brush up on what concept attainment is, you can check your Teaching for Biliteracy book, pages 52 to 55, or pop into this BrainPop link. It will give you some extra background into what concept attainment means. Likewise, any field trips, off-site experiences, all that hands-on stuff should be really like week 1 stuff when you can. Weeks 2, 3, and 4 should be focused on disciplinary literacy and strategic inquiry and research. This is when students are beginning to ask questions about the essential question, ask questions for their research that help them to answer the questions that they have about how they'll answer the essential question. We're really looking for I-CANs that are based on skill. So like students will be able to determine biased and unbiased reporting about blankety blank. So they're not really content-based, like students will learn the 50 states, not that. It will be strategic and skill-based. Again, refer to your core competencies at the top of the page here and your learning targets for some indicators of what those core competencies are. Ideally, it would be really great if we could have 2 I-CAN statements for the week that are skill-based and then consistent across all of our sites. Here's a resource for concept attainment from that link. And then here is a resource that can help you with determining what guided strategic inquiry is, as opposed to, say, guided reading, as opposed to, say, just random researching and perusing the internet and things like that. Like, what does guided strategic inquiry instruction look like? Okay, now we're moving on to week 5. This is when we get into contrastive analysis. Contrastive analysis will require you to plan which sounds, word parts, grammar and syntax, and how language is used, parts that you are going to emphasize, and that you are going to transfer to the second language. Some of the practices which are must-do practices and will be observed for accountability next year include the side-by-side, the language experience approach, contrastive analysis of the side-by-side for the phonology, morphology, syntax, the transfer of that contrastive analysis to your letras tramposas, and then finally translanguaging. All of those things can be pre-planned here. When you start to look at your vocabulary and phrases that you're going to transfer between languages, start to think about the sounds that you're going to have to transfer, the morphology or word parts that you're going to have to transfer, the syntax or the grammar pieces that are similar and different between Spanish and English, and then finally how language is used or language pragmatics. And how those are used differently depending upon the culture of English language use and the culture of Spanish language use. So all of that gets planned here and will then inform you of how to set up your bridge and then later your extension. So weeks 6 and 7 include the extension in Spanish. When you have weeks 6 and 7, you're no longer teaching content to students. You are teaching language. So what parts of Spanish language, what parts of Spanish expression and discourse are you going to need to teach in weeks 6 and 7 so that students are successful in transferring their content knowledge into the second language? You want to give students a unique and new opportunity to show their learning, so they're not actually replicating projects and translating projects, but they get like a new endeavor. And then finally, week 6 and 7 do dictados in Spanish. Like I said, it's one complete compound sentence that includes the unit's vocabulary words in the second language, because the dictado's purpose is really that students read and write on grade level. Then finally, you want to do an assessment of the extension in Spanish. So again, you have two options. The teachers can determine the criteria to assess the class's language use or application by selecting criteria from these rubrics, or individuals or groups of students can determine the criteria that they want to use to assess their language use and application. Both of these options, I think, like I said about the English one, really support our development as practitioners of personalized learning and giving students some voice and choice. The first one has a little bit more limited or teacher control, and the second one, of course, is like the uber extreme individual control. The second one is really nice if we're thinking about building portfolio assessment, because it will allow students to be able to target skill areas or skill bands that they haven't yet had assessment in or are still developing proficiency in. So it's real supportive of a continuum. Here you will see that the rubrics are for the Spanish extension are here. You're going to notice on the next slide that those rubrics are actually the Common Core rubrics for Spanish literacy. So this is really what we want you to focus on, not necessarily the content of social studies, but how language is being used. Lastly, and most importantly, is that we will be taking a look at how we can do biliteracy assessment for our students. We will be looking at benchmarking students in English and Spanish and then comparing those samples so that we can figure out what students can do in Spanish, what they can do in English, what they can do in both of their languages, what they can do in neither of their languages, and what they can do in only one language but not the other. Here's an example of how one teacher has looked at the English-Spanish comparison. So take a look. You may remember reading Biliteracy from the Start, Literacy Squared. Here's an example of assessment and benchmarking for biliteracy and why it's so important. Right now, our dual language program has what I would consider parallel monolingualism, meaning that we teach Spanish in isolation, we teach English in isolation, and we don't have a lot of evidence that we are engaging students in cross-linguistic transfer, specifically at the middle school. So these are areas that we're going to really hone in on and work on in the next couple of years. Parallel monolingualism is characterized by bilingual strategies such as code switching, borrowing, and phonetic transfer that just happens kind of randomly. And it also looks at second language writing development as measured against standards for monolingual speakers. I'm sure all of us have experienced assessing our students' writing against the Lucy Calkins rubrics and having either our colleagues or others say, well, this is not even a third grade student. Really unfair and reflects a lack of understanding of what a biliterate student brings to the endeavor and the power of being holistically bilingual rather than being judged as a monolingual in both Spanish and then a monolingual in English. So holistic bilingualism sees writing strategies as part of a process to write in two languages. So when we have students that are code switching and borrowing and using Spanish grammar with English words, those are all normal parts of developing biliteracy, and they have cognitive advantages, but they do need instruction. We need instruction to be able to help our students to determine how and when to use language. The second thing about holistic bilingualism is that we want to be able to assess our students' writing and performance against what they can do in both languages, rather than what they can't do in both languages. Here are some additional statements about parallel bilingualism and holistic bilingualism. You can pause the presentation right now and go through and read a little bit about this. This past spring over at Butler Middle School, I've had the opportunity to engage in biliteracy assessment with the Spanish AP teacher, Aaron O'Connell, and his 8th grade English Language Arts cohort teacher. The cohort teacher came in and said, well, this student isn't even a 3. He's not even a 3rd grade writer. And her paradigm was changed within 45 minutes of working with her to see that this student has skills which are transferred from Spanish to English and that those skills are evidence of very high cognition and problem solving, and she had a whole new appreciation for what this student was able to do. So go ahead, take a pause, and read through. The rubric that we most likely will be using, with maybe some accommodations for our middle school, will be the Literacy Squared Writing Rubric, which focuses on spelling, structure, and content. We will only be using these rubrics when we determine when we're going to sit down with our English and Spanish benchmarks and we're going to compare what students can do in both languages. You may have seen this before. If you haven't seen it, you can go back to Biliteracy from the Start and check it out there. But I will be sharing an online Excel document with the rubric in it that we can use for our learning. The most important thing about assessing biliteracy is really thinking about what students do in their first language that impacts their second, what students do in their second language that impacts their first, and what is the bidirectional transfer? What do they do between both of their languages? So we're going to get a chance a couple times a year next year to look at how students are using discourse, sentence, and phrasal level language and word level language, and then finally how they're using their phonics. Then we'll be able to plan for more strategic instruction in both the ELA and Spanish language arts BOOFs, as well as in the dictados, which is where all of the word work happens. We're really hoping to see measurable impact in the MAP vocabulary section, as well as in our ASW process for assessment for biliteracy. So that's quite a bit. I did want to set you guys up for success next week as you work together. The goal of June 13th through 16th is to leave on the 16th with 5 social studies units for Year B planned in the curriculum map. I do think that a lot of it is not going to require negotiation of any sort, but simply filling in the blanks with all of the various resources that have been developed and getting it all into one curriculum map. Please also know, I did say this a few times, but the curriculum map that we are creating is actually the guaranteed curriculum for dual language. As I said, you do have the flexibility to talk with your principals to do other things. However, we do need and are required to have a curriculum map that we can share with our parent stakeholders as well as our CNI stakeholders. So with that, I wish you the absolute best. Please know that Tim Smilanich will be doing his practicum, and he will be supervising the work next week and involving himself in the work. He does not have experience in this area. You guys are the experts, and he is simply getting an experience of supervising a PLC in a department that he cares a lot about. He is a future dual language teacher at South High School, looking to expand the program there, so this experience for him will be really, really empowering, and I appreciate all of your collegialism. Also know that the ELA, SLA booth work will be happening simultaneously, and that team is also a resource for this work. Thank you guys so much, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. How do we stop this?
Where's your fridge? Oh, well, I know. And then, the soda machine is eating people's money. Sorry? Oh, those are cute.
Well, you know, like adult shoes hurt.
Yeah.
They have to wear them at 2 o'clock, but I'm going to wait until exactly 2 o'clock to put them on.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna sneak back.
Yeah, and there they are, those darn adult shoes.
Oh.
Hey, Carlita, when you have a second, could you help me with something?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I can't get QuickTime to shut off.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Let's see. Do you think I can move some stuff in here?
Yes, you can. Yep, both of those are mine, so do it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. This is a shared space. Okay,
It's just for Rick's luncheon today, and
it's totally fine. Oh my gosh. So what's the problem with this? Are you an expert in QuickTime?
I have nothing. I don't know anything about it.
Oh my gosh.
I'm
Good for
sorry.
you. Good for you.
Oh gosh.
Quit QuickTime. Okay, I did it. Do you want to save the changes made to the document screen recording?